All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this Advanced Teaching Roles Q&A session. We will go ahead and get started. If you have not already, please change your name in your little Zoom box to tell us your first and last name and also your organization so we can know where you are chatting from or joining us from. My name is Leah Sutton. I'm the Advanced Teaching Roles Program Lead at the Department of Public Instruction, and my role is really to help support districts as they design and implement advanced teaching roles. So we're really excited to have this conversation, and I hope that you'll call on me if you have questions anytime about advanced teaching roles. I also want to thank Maureen Stover and Rachel Van Devender from Best in C who help us uh, pull these events off and help email out invitations and keep track of registrations and do a lot of logistics support. So we're really grateful for their help. Looking at our day to day, our hour together, I'm going to give just a quick overview of advanced teaching roles, talk a little bit about the grant opportunity for this year. Dr. Tom Tomberlin from DPI is with us as well to share any thoughts he has on advanced teaching roles from the perspective of the department. And then we have the bulk of our time devoted to Q&A. So we want you to bring your questions around this grant opportunity and the RFP. And we have a couple of participating districts who will be here to answer questions, give a district perspective. Of course, we can answer from the department perspective, but you'll get some expertise and insights from districts who are doing the work on the ground. So that's a look at our agenda. So I'm going to give just a really quick overview of advanced teaching roles, just in case you're not familiar or you're still learning about the initiative. The main goal of advanced teaching roles is we have a grant opportunity that is designed to enable districts to design new organizational structures in their schools. And those new organizational structures are meant to do a few things. First, they're meant to create advancement opportunities for effective teachers who can earn more money for taking on more responsibility. And that is typically by leading a team of teachers and being responsible for the performance of the students on that team, or by actually just reaching and teaching more students on their own. One of the goals of these new organizational structures is to create a team structure so that teachers on the team received embedded professional support, day-to-day job embedded professional support that helps our developing teachers get better faster and hopefully be more successful with students and be retained in the profession. One of the things that Advanced Teaching Roles is intended to do is distribute leadership across the school building such that principals have a team of instructional leaders who can have a better pulse on how things are going in the school building. And then lastly, one of the goals is to ensure that by creating these new structures, you're making sure that all students have access to at least one effective teacher, either in their classroom, their main teacher of record, or through their teaming structure. So this is just a really basic illustration of what an advanced teaching roles structure could look like. You'll see here that we sort of have a level of lead teacher these are folks who are elevated, receiving additional compensation and have met rigorous selection criteria to be in these roles, and then they lead small teams of other teachers. And the intent is to keep the teams very small. Actually, legislation requires it to be 3 to 8 because we don't want a team to be so big that you can't really provide meaningful support. So it's really intended to be totally new organizational structure that creates these small teams where each teacher can get a lot of support throughout the day. So we have an annual RFP opportunity, an annual grant opportunity for districts. This is created by the General Assembly in 2016, is now available, recurring dollars available for this each year. Proposals are due to the department this year on August 15th. And I think we're going to put the link to the website with the RFP in the chat, so you'll have that there. There's $5.5 million recurring available for grants. That's the total bucket of money. So some of that is obligated for previous grants, but that's the total amount that's available for this purpose. If you're a district who is applying for advanced teaching roles, the grant terms are 3 years, but you can receive funds for up to 2 3-year terms. So when you think about the entire runway of ATR grant funding, you potentially could receive it for up to 6 years. The grant funds are intended to support your transition and your design of advanced teaching roles. So grant funds can be used for hiring technical assistants for your program, supporting a central office position, someone who's going to lead the program, paying for professional development for your teachers who are moving into these roles, but it cannot be used for salaries for the advanced teachers. And so that has to be supported. There's a couple of ways that you can support the salaries, which I'll talk about in just a second. And importantly, because we're elevating teachers and a lot of time we're giving them release time to do their coaching and leading, we're moving them out of a traditional classroom role. We have to reallocate their students across the team. And so within the grant term, districts are given class size flexibility for their ATR schools. So that class size flexibility enables you to kind of make these staffing changes and do this redesign that's necessary under advanced teaching roles. So as I mentioned, there's a grant program, and then there's also state salary funding for ATR. So there's two different ways the state is financially supporting ATR. First is that grant program, which we just talked about, and then the second is ATR salary supplements. And this is funding that can support the pay differentials for these teachers in these leadership roles. There's currently $10.9 million available for ATR salary supplements. The state has allocated $10,000 for each adult leadership position, and I'll have the definitions for these positions in subsequent slides, and then $3,000 for classroom excellence. Now, importantly, the state will only support up to 15% of your teachers in each school being an adult leadership teacher, and up to 5% of teachers in each school being a classroom excellence teacher. And those limits are really to ensure that we're not sort of elevating everyone, and that it is a really rigorous position that people are selected into. So this is the definition for an adult leadership teacher, and this is this team lead teacher who is working with teachers to help them with their professional development, and also working with the students on the team. So here is the definitions, and I want to make sure we clarify this first one: works in the classroom providing instruction for at least 30% of the instructional day. This person does not have to be a teacher of record. They do not have to have their own class assigned to them, but at least 30% of their time, and likely more, should be in the classroom supporting students. So that could be co-teaching with the teachers on the team. That could be pulling small groups of students to help support intervention time, but they need to be continually working with students and providing instruction. We don't want them to become an administrator who's just, doing administrative duties all the time. We want them to stay close to instruction so that they can have the impact that we hope they'll have. Leads a team of between 3 to 8 teachers, shares responsibility for the performance of the students on the team, and that's really important, accountability metric for these roles. Our traditional instructional coaching roles don't have that accountability piece, so that distinguishes ATR from those more traditional instructional coaching roles, and then is not a school administrator. And then the other role that is funded by the salary supplements through the state is the classroom excellence role. And this is a teacher who takes on 20% more students than the year before, when they didn't have the role. So the most recent previous year, they were not in the role, they had to take on 20% more students. And these are the two ATR positions that are defined in legislation. Within your plan, you can articulate additional roles that you design on your own, but those roles would not be eligible for the state salary supplement funding. These are the only two roles that are eligible for that salary supplement funding at this time. So looking at our dates for the RFP, we released it in May. The proposals are due in October, and then we'll be on track to review the proposals and create select districts to participate in the upcoming year's grant program by October 15th. And the intent for the timeline is that the spring of 2026 would be a planning time. You'd be really spending that year planning your program, and then 26-27 will be the first year of implementation in your ATR districts. And there is also legislation, I went over this last time, but there is also legislation that kind of creates some guardrails around how many schools can be implementing advanced teaching roles at one time. It's important to sort of take it slow and slowly phase it in. And so there are some legislation sort of creating some guardrails around that. And that is also printed in the RFP, and happy to answer questions about that if you have it. So that's a really quick overview of the program. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tom to see if he would like to share anything that I missed or emphasize anything from the perspective of the department, and then we'll do some Q&A.
Sure. Thanks, Leah. And welcome, everybody. I'm very glad you're here. It's very good, and I'm very appreciative that we have Leah here to manage the nuts and bolts of this. Those of you who know me know that it's I'm a big picture guy, not the details. So we're very happy to have Leah here to support us in that. Speaking of, I want to preface what I'm getting ready to say with neither I nor any of my staff has anything to do with the RFP selection process. So what I'm getting ready to tell you is my own personal opinion and does not necessarily have impact on the way your proposal would be received or evaluated. But for me, what I love about ATR and why it's so important to me is that it solves three major problems that plague our schools. And that is one, continuous improvement of teachers. We can't expect teachers to improve if we don't give them job embedded examples of how to do that. And when we recognize these people that have instructional excellence and expose our beginning teachers or our less effective teachers to them, that's the way we can start to promote that kind of change. Unless they can see something better, they're going to maintain what they think or how they have approached it in the past or what they've learned in the past. Second thing is our principals. Our principals have just an unmanageable job. And our clear expectation of principals is that they improve the quality of the teachers that they are working with. And we ask them to do that for somewhere between 50 and 100 teachers. That's not possible. And so ATR helps us break that down into manageable ways that we can directly work with teachers to improve their instructional excellence, and we're not relying on a single person to do that. There's a reason why we've put the ATR team, the lead teachers team, at about 3 to 8, because the organizational research tells us 8 is the most you can have and expect to create any meaningful change in your employees. And so we're adhering to that. Only 15% of these ATR teachers can be identified. And there's a reason behind that too, because if you divide it, that means that there should be 6 2/3 teachers for every advanced leadership teacher in your school, if you went full capacity. And so this is manageable. This is how we want you to do it. We don't want to create a situation where those folks are additionally overburdened. And then finally, retention of beginning teachers. We know from the data that I put out every year in the State of Teaching Profession report that the attrition rate for beginning teachers is extremely high. And we need to support them, and we need our best teachers to be working with them to support them through those early years, show them how to do things, give them the shortcuts that make life manageable that they've learned after 30 years or 20 years or whatever. And so we need to really focus on how we can keep these teachers and help them progress and become great teachers themselves. So my desire, and again, I can't guarantee you that this would get you a winning proposal. But from my perspective, focusing on how you're going to support, how this program supports the principals in their efforts to improve school performance and to create continuous improvement opportunities for all their teachers. How this helps identify our most effective teachers and give them the opportunity of increased recognition and a clear career opportunity to affect change in our schools. And third, how we really are going to focus on beginning teachers and less effective teachers to build their capacity, decrease their attrition rates, and keep them working in North Carolina public schools. Those are my big three. And again, this is Tom's personal opinion. This is what really appeals to me about the program. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the experts who are doing the work, and let them share their experiences.
And Tom, before you go, we did have one question.
Okay.
So Jeff asked, will you please talk more about the shared responsibility for the adult leadership teachers as part of the ATR supplements? And specifically, how the shared what is the shared responsibility for student performance?
Yes. So I will, yeah, I can talk about that. So for these ATR teachers, they do need to have shared responsibility. And I am working with the folks at SAS EVOS to develop a model specifically for the adult leadership role. It's not going to cover all of them. We still have the same issues that we have with EVOS for teachers at large. Not all teachers have EVOS. But in the case where they do, we're trying to develop a model that shows the impact of the advanced teacher on the teachers. So we have elected not to do a simple aggregation of the student growth of the teachers that are being served by that adult leadership teacher, just up to the level like we do with schools. If you think about it, at schools, you've got teacher, and then all the students are then aggregated at the school level, and we run the growth model. We want to do something a little different here, because if we did it that way, the incentive would be for advanced AL teachers to work primarily with high growth teachers. So if you want your EVOS to look better, you work with teachers who already have a high EVOS. And that's not what we want in this model. What we want is to create an opportunity for adult leadership teachers to work with teachers who need it most, and to be rewarded for that. And so we are working with SAS EVOS to develop a model that gets at that in a much better way than a simple aggregation would. That model is not complete, it's not ready. And so what we would ask is that you not have those adult leadership teachers participate in roster verification for EVOS, that we kind of keep them separate. We're doing a lot on the evaluation side to look at impact, but that formal EVOS model is not quite ready yet. We are working with SAS on that. So Jeff, I hope that answers your question.
Tom, I'll just add, Jeff, that we are also working on an evaluation instrument for adult leadership teachers. So this has also been in partnership with the Friday Institute and Basis Policy Research to develop an instrument that really captures this role as a distinct new role in schools. And in that instrument, there will be sort of indicators and elements related to, are you ensuring as an adult leadership teacher that students are receiving what they need and that the students are performing as we would like them to be done? So both of those two things, the EVOS model and the instrument, are still a couple of years away from prime time. And so in the meantime, in a proposal, districts really should be articulating how they're holding those teachers accountable, and your system that you're developing, your ATR model that you're developing at the district level, should have a mechanism for that. And so that's actually a really good pivot for us into our Q&A, because I love these two districts who are doing this work to speak to how they're holding teachers accountable and how they're looking at that shared responsibility. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and thank you, Jeff, for the question. Anybody who has questions, feel free to chat them in, or also just come off mute and we'll just have an open conversation. Thank you, Lauren. So just send your questions in and we'll get to them. But so I want to first introduce our panelists. First, we have Jennifer Boer, who is the Advanced Teaching Roles Coordinator in New Hanover County. New Hanover is a newer grantee, so they received their grant in 2024 and are doing finishing up their first year of implementation. So it's really fresh for Jennifer. She and her team have been grappling with some of these like big design questions. And then also we have Bishay Ferris, who's Director of Talent Acquisition for Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools. And Charlotte, many of you probably know, Charlotte was the first district in North Carolina to do ATR and has been doing it for over a decade and is now reaching full scale, so district-wide implementation in Charlotte, which you all know is a very large district. So they've been doing this for some time. So we have kind of two ends of the implementation spectrum here to share with you all the lessons that they've learned. So first, I'll just put that question to you all around how are you building in accountability for these adult leadership roles, specifically around the student performance piece.
Happy to jump in on that. So when we're looking at accountability on these adult leadership roles and how we're tracking to make sure that the impact is taking place, part of that is built into our talent pool. So every 3 years, you have to requalify in the talent pool in your third year in order to continue in the fourth. Of those 3 years, we'll look back and see, or 2 out of the last 3 years, have you shown positive growth? And one of the things to highlight is positive growth doesn't fall within the same limitations or the same requirements as what the general statute says. It really is, all these teachers are starting at a different place. Are they headed in the right direction year over year? And then another part of the component for accountability is we have specialists that go into the schools. And we didn't always, when we were a much smaller department, we didn't have that. So we have specialists that go into the schools, and we're always working with the MCLs, and we're attending PLC meetings, and we are making sure that their strategies are in line to bring out the best yield and performance. And we're also looking at data with them. We have data dive days, we have MCL, our advanced teaching roles, the adult leadership peer-to-peer sessions where we talk about data. So we've always got our finger on the pulse of what's happening in terms of the impact these adult leaders are having.
And so this is our first year of implementation, but we have done something very similar in that part of my role is I am meeting with the MCTs regularly to look at their classrooms that they're supporting and what that data looks like. We talk about how they're moving students or if there's students who don't appear to be moving. So because we don't have at this point year to year how there's supported teachers are growing as far as EVOS goes, what we've done so far this year is throughout the course of the year looked at their universal screeners, looked at their NC check-ins and compared those based on how they looked district-wide, compared them with district averages. And obviously now we're starting to look at EOG scores and what that looks like. So we're doing that. We also are providing PD to our MCTs each month to kind of make sure they're in line with what we would like to be happening. As a district, we have historically in our elementary schools done literacy profiles for the entire school. Our MCTs had to do literacy profiles for the classrooms that they were supporting, if they were supporting in literacy. And then we also worked with our math lead to look at our math data in those rooms. So that was our entry point this year, not having year over year data just yet.
Thanks, that's helpful. And I do think Bashay's point about requalification for the role, one thing that you would want to build into your design is this idea that these roles are not forever, right? Once you're selected, you're achieving eligibility for the role, you're selected for the role because you meet certain criteria as a teacher, but you don't want to sort of set up an expectation that once you're in the role, you're in it forever. You do want to have some accountability mechanism there so that folks know they have to kind of requalify for the role or perform in a certain way to sort of stay in the role. So I'm going to pivot now to some questions from Lauren Hennett in Roanoke Rapids. And I think, Tom, the first one might be something that you may have to help me with. Lauren, your second question is around the implementation limits, the phase-in requirements, and those are set in stone because they are in legislation. So we don't have any wiggle room there. And we recognize that for small districts, those percentage limits that are in the legislation are somewhat restrictive because it does mean you really have to work with a really small number of schools. That's been communicated to the General Assembly, but those are the limits in legislation. So that's kind of what we have to operate with right now. And Tom, for the first question, it says, if we're already working with an external organization, public impact, on an opportunity culture pilot for 25-26 with one school that is self-funded, how might that impact the grant proposal as it relates to the phase-in requirements if they already have one that's kind of doing it on its own?
Well, if you're doing this, so if you're doing this on your own, which is acceptable, except that it doesn't open you up to the salary supplements for your advanced teachers, we wouldn't have anything to say about your rate of expansion. If, however, as a preface to potentially implementing, well, as part of implementing, you're also going to apply for an ATR grant, then you're on the hook to follow the expansion, the expansion limits set in statute. So as long as you're not taking our money, we're not going to govern how you expand that program. If you do take our money, then you've got to follow the rules in the statute. So that could be something you want to consider when you're considering applying for a grant. Of course, we want you in the program, but we would certainly understand if that, for whatever reason, doesn't serve your purposes.
Got it. Thank you both. I think to provide a little bit of clarification on that question, the phase-in requirements, like if those are set in stone, that's not necessarily problematic for us. I think I'm more curious as to if you guys I don't have any recommendations or thoughts about some of the wording in parts of the RFP related to okay, so one school we're already planning on doing some of this work and it will be in place by the time ahead. We've already done some design work for one school. So if we were to receive grant funding, some of that would be kind of icing on the cake for that school, but we are looking at the RFP to potentially expand further. And so I'm just curious as to how a lot of the way that I have seen the RFP written, as I've just kind of glanced over it so far, it seems to be really geared towards districts that are just starting this from scratch. And I didn't know if it was even, I guess, worthwhile for us to apply if that's not really what the RFP is geared toward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let me comment on that. So we're going to release proposals and awards sometime around December of 2025. So you would really be receiving planning funds, should the budget allow, for the remainder of the 25-26 school year. We would need to talk about what that means of could you expend those funds in your current program and stuff. I'm not going to get into the weeds on that, but it could be that it's in your interest to write something like 2 schools into your RFP or 3 schools, and then you've got those schools approved as you move into implementation for 26-27. Does that make sense?
It does. That's helpful. Thank you.
And Leah, please feel free to chime in if I've stepped in it.
No, I think that's right. And I think, Lauren, in the proposal, sort of articulating how the grant could help you further, right? Expand and sort of if you wanted to articulate the limits of your ability to do this locally, which I think is totally reasonable and fair, then that would make a case for why the state funding is helpful, in addition to the access to the salary dollars, which I think, of course, is the salary dollars, and if I wasn't clear earlier, those are ongoing. So if you're a grantee and you stay in good standing with the ATR program, those are ongoing dollars as long as the General Assembly doesn't make a change in their funding structure. So, that would persist, and that would be funding that you could tap into for a longer period of time, which of course I think districts need. What other questions do we have? Anybody want to come off mute and ask other questions?
Yeah, I think Jennifer and Leah, you kind of answered this at the beginning. So when we were looking at, brainstorming about this, you can have a classroom excellence teacher without an ATL. So it can be either or.
You can, yeah.
Okay.
It is up to you as a district to sort of decide what roles you're going to use and how you're going to utilize them. So I could imagine a situation where a school has a couple classroom excellence teachers but doesn't have the teaming structure for some reason yet. Now, we certainly, I think, believe that the adult leadership teacher is a best practice, and we are digging in the evaluation, which the Friday Institute is the evaluator for this program, in which roles are most effective, and drilling into some of the actual implementation practices that lead to the greatest impact on student learning. And so we'll have more in the upcoming evaluation, which is released in October, to say about that. So I certainly wouldn't say that the adult leadership is. I would just say that we love to see the adult leadership, because we think that creates the collaboration and the professional support that we're looking for. And the classroom excellence is almost part of the career ladder of, if you have a great teacher who's really excellent with students but perhaps isn't ready yet to lead other adults, that's a really nice place for them to land, where they really still get to extend their reach and earn more money, but they don't then they can kind of aspire to that next role. So, and I'll let you guys, Jennifer and Bechet, to kind of lean in on that. But as far as the legislation and the sort of the policy, there's no requirement to have one versus the other.
So Jennifer, in New Hanover, did y'all start, because the advice is to start small. Did you start small with the MCTs, or did you have both at the same time?
Yeah, so we did start small. We started with the MCTs.
Okay.
We are not doing the classroom excellence teachers yet. We really wanted to create that team and build that community of collaboration in our buildings with those folks. So we started with 2 MCTs at 4 elementary schools, and then we do have one elementary school that has one, really because of the size of the school.
And then what's your plan to phase in more?
Well, we're actually adding 2 more schools this coming school year with the MCT, and we're going to start thinking through and working on that classroom excellence side. But we wanted to have that strong community there, and then our hope is eventually from some of our supported teachers, as they grow, potentially even utilize them as some of the classroom excellence. But we wanted to give it a little bit of time, because those are teachers who need to be supported right now.
Yeah. Thank you.
And we did also have a question from Tammy in the chat. She asked, could the adult leadership teacher position be phased in after we had developed the classroom excellence teacher?
Yes, so, and Bishay, I'm interested in your perspective on this, but there is no restriction in the policy on that. So Tammy, if that's the route that you all wanted to take, you would just need to articulate the thinking, right? What is the theory of change around that? So it's just a decision that you would have to make in your district. Bishay, what would you add?
So I don't know if it would be sometimes the best. You have to look this on a case by case basis, but to pigeonhole and say we're going to take one role and not take another yet and phase one in and out, rather than looking at the school environment and the needs of that school and the staff that's already existing in that building that you may want to retain. I would recommend looking at it from school perspective, having the flexibility to say, we're going to try this role or not. If you have strong instructional leadership, by all means, adult leadership sounds like the way to go. You could spread the impact around multiple classrooms. If you don't have folks that are ready yet to take on adult leadership, but they're phenomenal classroom teachers, we have some schools that have no MCLs, no adult leadership positions. We have some that are only expanded impact teachers, which is our equivalent of classroom excellence. And it really just depends on the school's need, what's available, and what the goal of the school is. Is it retention? Is it recruitment? And all of them incorporate student achievement, of course. But your secondary needs, are they retention and recruitment? What do you have?
Thank you.
And there's sort of different ways to think about the starting small, the phasing in, strategy. So there is certainly the expectation in the legislation that that's like a school is, slowly phase in across your district as far as adding schools. And then there's the thought of, we're going to start with 1 or 2 roles in this school. And of course, it depends on the size of the school, but we're going to start with a couple of roles in this school. And then in a couple of years, I could see us adding 2 more roles in this school. And so there's certainly different ways to think about how you phase it in over time.
And for
Go
the
ahead.
grant, do we have to have all that mapped out specifically?
The only thing that you need to map out for the proposal is the school phase in for the first 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so you don't have to tell us precisely the number of roles each year. That is really, as Bashay kind of mentioned, that really should be a school-based decision. You're working with the principal, you're looking at the performance of the students, the needs of the teachers, and that kind of thing. And you don't have to, we don't expect that you're going to be able to tell us if in 3 years this school is going to need XYZ, because that
Okay.
it would be not accurate. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there guidelines or restrictions around using external organizations to help with this?
There are not. So, and we can let Jennifer and Bashay talk about how they've engaged with external organizations, but many districts use their grant funds to hire a technical assistance provider who comes in and supports this design and transition. So, Bashay, you want to talk a little bit about what you all have done?
Absolutely. So in the beginning, we were a public impact opportunity culture district. And I will say it provided a wonderful foundation on which to tailor. It really is. It's a great framework. And I know we don't endorse any one organization with anything like this, but our experience was public impact gave us such a strong foundation to then tailor to what our district needed moving forward and switch and amend and add in different components. But not having to think and guess about what the core of what opportunity culture or ATR would look like in our district.
Yeah. Jennifer, what about you guys?
Yeah, so we have not used a outside vendor as far as helping us with our program implementation design. We talked with other districts. We partnered a lot with Pitt County. They were super helpful in planning our design, but we have used other companies for things like we really wanted to dig into the 6 co-teaching model so that we could provide our MCTs with support around that. So we used the Bureau of Educational Research to provide some PD around that. We also did some coaching PD where we worked with a company. So we've used it for that role, but not necessarily for our design implementation.
Great. So in the proposal, you'll sort of need to articulate, we're asking for this amount. And then of course you have your budget that would say, X amount would go, if you were going to use a vendor, X amount is going to go to the vendor, and this is what they're going to provide for us. And X amount is going to maybe be for this PD that we want to, utilize for our teachers. And then X amount's locally going to be used for, whatever. So you'll articulate that in your budget, but there are not restrictions on hiring other folks to come in and provide support for your district. The main restriction on the grant funds is it cannot be used for salary supplements for the teachers in the roles. But you can use it to pay for a central office FTE should you have one, or to help support a central office FTE to lead the program. So April has a question in the chat. She's from Mooresville Graded School District. Could you both describe your communication methods about the need for this? How did you communicate the need for this change to your stakeholders?
You want to go, Jennifer? I'll
You
follow.
go ahead, Bashay.
So it's been a long time since we spoke to all the stakeholders. And I wasn't there in the beginning, so I'll be honest about that. But what I do know about the program is it was a collaborative process, and that really was something that helped with that buy-in. You brought in your school principals. Of course, they're going to be implementing the program. They need to be part of it and at the table, but you also, your instructional leaders, your district leaders, community members, all those opinions were incorporated in and kind of roundtabled and thought about what could this solve? What has it done in other districts? This is how we're looking at it. What's your input? What's your concerns? When you are implementing in a school and then talking to stakeholders once the program's already in place, that's a little bit of a different method. What we do, and it's worked out really well for us, is we pre-package and we give schools that are implementing all the communication that they'll need for parents, for staff, for community members, for everybody. And then they are able to tailor that to what the school's message and needs and experiences and culture is. But giving that framework out for that communication. But that is already once the program's in place in your district.
So we started with our senior leadership that was very interested in having the program come to our district. Then started talking with our principals, our board, gained interest that way, and then from there started talking to our schools and trying to decide which schools would really want to implement. And so that was something that the principals and the would talk to their school improvement teams about. And then schools would apply to be a part so that it wasn't something that they had to do. It was something that they got to choose to be a part of. And then from there would, like Bashay mentioned, would have things ready for school staffs to learn more about the program and the why behind supporting our schools that way.
What about parents? Have you, and this is April, this is something that's kind of interesting, is that early on when I started, I've worked with advanced teaching roles in different capacities for about 10 years. And one of the things I was concerned about early on was, our parents confused? Like, you suddenly have two teachers, and how does this work? And who's the person I go to? And I was really like concerned about that. And I don't think that has borne out as an actual thing that districts are hearing, but correct me if I'm wrong, guys.
We had a district letter that we sent out to the parents in the schools that were involved in ATR. And to your point, we sent it out. Parents talked to their classroom teachers, but it was not an issue by any means.
I agree. A lot of parents were really actually on board once you got the letters, and they were interested to see more. One of the things that our schools does, they'll hold a webinar or an ATR night where the parents can come and talk to the principal and some of the staff that's knowledgeable about it, district staff. And that kind of just quells the concerns, if there are any, but rarely are there any. It's gotten so common. I think a lot of people who follow education already are aware of what's happening with ATR in North Carolina.
Are those letters, like, could you guys share your letters and I could share them out just as a sort of a sample way to inform families? That'd be great.
Thank you.
And I think I would say to just when we were starting all of this and rolling everything out, I was very, very concerned about all of the perceptions that may, like, what would the supported teachers feel like? What would the parents feel like? And pleasantly surprised at how well received. Teachers are happy to receive the support. Parents are happy for their children to receive the support. So that has been a wonderful thing to experience.
Thank you.
Great. Other questions?
One more question, it kind of related to one earlier, but it's April Mooresville again. So for your if we have like a current instructional coach that we would want to use as an MCL, but they have not had EVOS data in the last like 2 years, is there a way to use like the school's data if the school has been growing in certain areas and like that they've been helping with math, or they've been helping specifically with literacy? Is that allowed?
So let me weigh in on that. You do not have to use EVOS in your selection criteria. And even if you use it, you can stipulate that for teachers who do not have EVOS, the weighting of our selection criteria is going to be adjusted to account for the fact that they don't have EVOS. So I don't want you to feel like you're kind of hemmed in here that every AL you select has to have, EVOS scores off the chart. That's not the case at all. I want to respond to the second part of your question. It's really not appropriate to ascribe a school's growth to an individual teacher. And so we kind of, there's been a lot of talk about that over the years with EVOS, and we really want to not promote that kind of messaging. We don't, for your art teacher, we don't assign them the school level EVOS. That's not really appropriate. So I would kind of discourage you from going that route of using the school level growth. And I would focus on what are the skills and competencies that you want to see in adult leadership teachers. EVOS may be a part of that, but where it's not a part of that, you adjust your model and the weighting of your model to account for that so that all teachers can have the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shay, anything you guys are doing in Charlotte to kind of, I know it's been a while, you've kind of transitioned your instructional coaches roles over to advanced teaching roles, but how are you looking at multiple measures? And I think Tom's point is really important because we do have so many teachers who don't have EVOS, but we also, I'll also say from experience with districts that pretty much every district is looking at EVOS because it's, such an objective measure of impact. So Vishay, how are you guys getting around that issue if you have teachers who don't have recent growth data?
Absolutely. In our experience, there's two ways of looking at that. The first is if they've been an instructional coach for a certain number of years, you look at the specific EVOS growth of those teachers that they supported, that they spent the majority of their time with. And if those teachers showed positive growth, you could use that as a qualifier. We got our cutoff at 60% of coaching caseloads showing growth. The second is, and if often the case with academic facilitators that take on 15 and 20 teachers, and you can't really pinpoint who was on a caseload. I wouldn't do this past your first couple of years of implementation, but using sort of like a micro credential or a qualifier, a course to show basic proficiency in coaching skills and academic qualification. You could use that for your first round, but once that's done and they've got appropriately sized coaching caseloads, to focus in on that teacher growth.
Thank you.
And your selection, process is yours to design. So these are, just things that you'll grapple with as you're developing your proposal. Jennifer, do you want to add anything there?
So again, because we were just starting, we started with the qualifications we were looking for. And we created a checklist that earned points that was then weighted because we did have some people who had been instructional coaches, but we had classroom teachers. So we wanted to make sure to make that opportunity available to all.
Great. We're getting to the end of our hour. So are there any final questions from districts? All right, hearing none, I will just remind you of the due dates. So we are, proposals are due to DPI on August 15th, and for the detailed instructions for how you have to submit those proposals is in the RFP, so please pay attention to that. They will be submitted to me. And I want to thank our panelists for joining us. Thank you, Vishay and Jennifer, for being with us. And thank you also to Tom for your expertise. If you have any advanced teaching roles questions, you can always email me. I'm happy to meet with you, happy to review things as you're putting things together. I do not score the proposals, just like Tom said, so I'm happy to provide my best feedback to you if that is helpful. So please use me as a resource. Just checking the chat to see if there's anything else. Yes, I will send out the presentation slides. I will also send out a recording of the presentation. We will get the letters, the parent notification letters from Charlotte and New Hanover to share with you as resources. And you'll have all of that in your inbox in the next couple of days. Great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.